everybody to another Fat Tony's Q&A. For those of you that have never been to one of these before, we do Q&A sessions with fascinating people. The way this works is they're generally about an hour long, and we split the first half an hour or so into a chat between Matios and the hosts, and then you guys take the lead. So we can either ask questions on your behalf, or we will unmute you and you can ask whatever questions you want. So it's normally totally unscripted. I hope we don't have too many weird ones for you. But tonight's guest works in the field of behavioural health, special education and adjacent spaces. He says he's staunchly opposed to reductionism, but always blown away when the reductionists get things right. He's a good friend of ours, a great pillar of the Fat Tony's community. It's Matios Berhe, and he is also a self-described idiot with wonderful teachers. I saved that bit for last. Welcome, Matios. It's great to have you here. Welcome to Fat Tony's.
Hey, thank you very much. This is fire. Very excited.
My first question is, what is fire? I'm not in tune with American slang.
Oh man, I mean, it goes back to Heraclitus. Honestly, the nature of all things is change. Nah, I'm just playing. No, it just means like it's badass, it's dope, it's fire.
Awesome, man.
I guess it's a secular amen.
Oh, awesome! Oh, I'm stealing it. I'm gonna.
I stand with you. Yeah, I stand with what you're saying. I'm with that.
So I guess the first thing we normally do is ask guests, could you give us a little bit of an introduction, tell us about your background, how you got into behavioural health, and what it is exactly you do?
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, I mean, out of college, like I was writing for the newspaper, our college paper, and through that, kind of got into content creation and marketing and all that kind of shit. So I was working with like I mean, yeah, there were startups, small companies out in the Inland Empire in Rancho Cucamonga, Fontana, Rialto area. And it kind of brought me in touch with, I didn't know this at the time, but like logistics and shipping and all that kind of stuff. And seeing people be able to make a living selling directly to customers. It was makeup, there were nails, it was like all kinds of stuff. It was crazy to me. And I graduated college in 2010. So the recession was in 2008. It was kind of hard. But like lipstick never stopped selling, makeup never stopped selling, and there are a couple other categories where like maybe they dropped by 2% or something like that, whatever that even means, because like that's just so insignificant for whatever they're doing. So in that time, my wife was actually working at the front desk at out here we call them non-public schools. So if there's any libertarians listening, you're going to hate this part, but these are private-public partnerships or public-private partnerships. The same way Elon Musk is able to get money to build rockets, which I'm down with for the record, there are people who are able to start these institutions which are working parallel to schools, and they're fulfilling the same function. This is how charter schools exist, and so this in the States, it kind of gets I don't know. I don't know what the word would be. It gets controversial, I guess, because of how people tend to look at charter schools, and it's a bunch of bullshit though, because they'll sit here and say they shouldn't have these charter schools because they're pulling resources from people that we want to help. But then you look at the demographics of those charter schools, and it's like those are people you're saying you want to help. Like, it's difficult to track. So yeah, there's a lot of bullshit that goes on with all that kind of stuff. But anyway, my wife was working at one of these schools. And out of college, like on the weekends, I would work at a group home as a second job, or I'd work at the Y, because it didn't conflict with my hours. It was like a second job, almost like a side hustle, I guess. Shout out to the No Child Left Behind Act, because they financed a lot of that. So I was able to get these jobs, and I thought like, yeah, why not just like work with kids and help them or whatever. So in the future, when my wife is at the school, they needed someone in a special education class, what they would call a functional skills classroom. And this actually was tying into, I think it was Shay had brought up like what are the limits of special education when it comes to like life skills and compared to education or whatever. And I mean, this is part of why some of those charter schools exist, is because people actually do have different kinds of philosophies. And there's some people who are like, we need to teach our kids academics. Like, this is the function of school. But for other people where and this is where it gets tricky, because maybe, like, according to them, physiologically, there are people who like just can't learn algebra. The number of facts that they would have to recall, the procedures that they'd have to remember, all that kind of stuff. It's like there's no capacity for that. Therefore, we should no longer have an academic focus, but instead they do what they call functional skills, life skills, basically. But then you end up turning a classroom into a day program when you do this kind of stuff. So there are really amazing educators who kind of use this system to prop up, like they're teaching kids how to count with money, but they don't think that this kid can't learn algebra. And then you end up working with a kid who, by all measurements, and these are according to their assessments, has limited communication, doesn't communicate more than, let's say, a 3-year and 8-month-year-old based on their assessments, which are normalized and they're constantly updating. And, so it's like, it's not complete bullshit. They're pulling these numbers from something, and they're saying, on average, and we know how that goes, but like on average, this is where the 3-year-olds are at, and like this 15-year-old is where those 3-year-olds are at. But there's a lot of other stuff that's going on in the brain that it's hard to account for. But what tripped me out is that now we're using icons, and with the icons, I can ask a kid a trigonometric question, and I can say, here, I could just read the question to him. All right, what should we do next? And he can select, the sign operation. Okay, what value? And he can enter the value for me, and I can see that. So now I'm asking myself, what's going on? And then that same kid ends up sequencing. And when I saw that, I was just like,
what is sequencing?
He sequenced the icons that we had for communication. You know what I mean? Like what are, if I can't even think of any, it makes me emotional to think about, but like, I can't think of any trigonometric question that you'd have, but you could ask, here's a triangle with fucking this length sides, and here are the angles, like, what is the sign of X, or what value is X, or whatever. But then it's one of those, reflective triangles or whatever. So now you have to you could deduce the length of another side or whatever. And you have a kid who can't talk, and who the teacher is like, nah, we got to show him what the icons are or whatever. And then now this kid basically makes a program for me to run. Like, honestly, I read a question to him, and then he put the shit in order. First, you're going to take the sign, then you're going to add whatever the fuck, and then you're going to, do whatever. And so it was this trippy ass shit. So now I'm in the heart of the beast, public education, but worse, private education.
Just to make sure I understand, with a kid who can do trigonometry, but like has like
he learned issues. Exactly, using his communication device. So he did learn. We were going over it because the teachers, there's a lot of teachers who you'll hear, and it's amazing because they're kind of in resistance to these people who are like, we need to teach at what assessments are at. And they're like, sure, assessments give us a certain amount of information, but like, I can't tell what's going in, so fuck it, I'm gonna teach him whatever the fuck I want. And part of that is geometry and trigonometry. Like, he's gonna learn this kind of stuff. So when I saw that, I was just like, bruh, this is kind of crazy. But then you come to find out, like, this is behavioral health. Now, I was working in marketing, and I had already known, the things that people say, it just makes no fucking sense. Like, if you want to sell windows, you find out who wants to buy windows, and you tell them, yo, I'm selling windows. Like, that's what marketing is. So then these motherfuckers start abstracting into higher and higher levels after that, and it's sort coming up with these analyses and just a bunch of nonsense. So I was like weary of people saying, we use these empirically, whatever the fuck, whatever to do, whatever.
Hey, Matios.
Yeah.
This is like a huge amount of information to download. Can I actually fire a question at you really quick? Because I'm not sure that I fully understand this, because I didn't grow up in charter schools. I'm definitely not sure that the Europeans understand this, because this might be a concept that they don't have over there. Would you be able to explain a charter school and then kind of like what kind of that whole situation? Because that's something that I'm not even sure if it's uniquely American, but that's a really interesting topic. That's really huge here in California. A lot of political.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, man. And it's fuck. Okay, so basically we have what's the word? Mandated education. I can't. There's a word for it. You know what I mean? But like, kids have to go to school, and so we have. You said what? Yeah. Kids have to go to school. Like
exactly.
Yeah, that's what the law is. And if you don't, well, then we're gonna get you. And so basically, these public schools all have standards, which they're trying to, I don't know. Standards are just directions for over 4 years. This is the shit that kids need to learn. They should know about this, this, and this. I'm going to ask them about it in these ways. They should be able to write a paragraph to tell me, or an essay to tell me, or answer a multiple choice question to tell me. And they should come away with these bits of knowledge or whatever. So then, naturally, you have a lot of people that don't fit into the education system, we could call it, or whatever, and they know this because they're not testing well, or there's what they would call behavioral issues, or all this kind of shit. But we also know that this is extremely like we're not coming into this neutral. Yeah, exactly. It's not neutral. Like, there's a lot of this that's like fucked up. Why not push kids' school back 1 hour if we can tell that it makes a difference in how long they sleep and how they eat breakfast, all that kind of nonsense. Like, there's no reason to not do that. So anyway, once you end up in a situation where people are not passing the assessments, they're not passing the tests, well, now you need interventions. Schools now get money from the government in order to employ these empirically validated interventions. They're research-based, and they work. So then, the reason why it's not working is, as they'll say, is, well, we didn't have enough resources to hire enough people. And now you got enough people. It's like, oh, well, we didn't have enough time to train them in the thing. There's always an excuse whenever an empirically validated method is employed and then it doesn't work. Oh, well, maybe the demographics were off. We did our study. And that's a valid critique, I think, and should be kind of generalized, but then they kind of just stop it too short or whatever. So anyway, then you get these charter schools, which are these smaller networks. Basically, people kind of put money into them so they can make them. And then
you describe them as public-private collaborations.
That is what they are. Whenever,
or is that
and here's why.
Version of them at least? Because that's
one version.
Fall under this.
I don't think so. I don't think so. The reason why these are public-private is because now these institute or organizations are coming in and then they're saying, we will work directly with your bottom 5 to 10% of performers, and it's all normalized. They have their bell curve, so they're saying we'll take the bottom 5 to 10%. That's where most of the behavioral issues are going to be. That's where aggression is going to be if you're finding it. That's where all learning developmental disabilities and all that kind of stuff. That's where those scores are kind of at. Then these guys come in and say, we'll do it for cheap. So then these institutions get money for training, you know what I mean? And they're tapping into grant money that exists. So the game, if you will, and it's still open to all you libertarians who want to look into this, because it's there for you if you're not lazy and you want to stop complaining for once and do something. Matios, not talking shit to any of our homesteader homies. I mean, I'm not a fan. We're not fans of people who just talk a bunch of shit. And I feel like that's where they're kind of at.
Fair enough.
Make a school district then, motherfucker. Teach my kids how to make whatever, but then they don't. So it's like, all right, then shut the fuck up and let us try to figure it out without polluting the conversation with your hater ass remarks. Not you, Jack. I mean, the whatever invisible people who exist.
So
I'm not a hater.
Those fucking libertarians. Just kidding. Sorry.
I'm not a hater.
It sounds like you've got the existing school system, which is heavily centralized. And it's almost like this idea of a Procrustean bed.
Beautiful.
Where if you don't fit into the bed, you'll chop the hands and the legs off. And some people just 100. Don't fit in. So it sounds like charter schools are a kind of solution to this.
I'm so jealous that, I wish I could have just summed it up as that. Thank you. And I'm going to use that for the rest of my life. But exactly that. Exactly that. And then they get money. There's grant money available for people because they're working with people with learning disabilities. They're working with people from, marginalized communities and all this kind of shit. So that's where the joke ends up, right? Because a lot of the propaganda against these charter schools or whatever is like, this is another version of what they call white flight and people just trying to pull their kids out from whatever schools and whatever. And we don't even have to. Who gives a fuck about? We don't have to get into that part.
No, but I'm wondering now, Matios. I want to take the libertarian perspective, which is this feels like, and it sounds like you're saying that people are taking advantage of this. Like it's the bottom 5 to 10%. It's the rejects. Sorry to use that term, but so it's easier for people to get in and be kind of pulling in resources and not really providing the best. But you tell me, man.
No. I mean, I think you did hit the nail on the
I'd
head.
be like, oh, that's where the government is. You give government money and they fuck it up. You know what I mean?
Sure. I mean, no. You're absolutely right. Like there are schools and there are people who kind of come in, but I mean, I've worked at a couple of these. You know what I mean? That has not been my experience, and I've worked with in administration.
I thought that you were kind of saying. I thought that you were kind of implying that earlier. So I must.
No. I'm sorry. Well, I mean, this is a critique of these charter schools, right? Where people feel like they're pulling resources away from the main pool of money, but exactly like you said, it's like it is a form of decentralization. So like when I walk in there, like I'm down with that. I think that that's cool. I think people need to get in on that, and they should absolutely 100% do that. So then I walk into this place, and then they're sort of telling me, yeah, and we use this behavioral psychological view of the world, and I was just like, oh my gosh, are you fucking kidding me? The human experience is so rich. There's no way that you could just reduce it to this stimulus response sort of. And there's this like gray area, because the reality is that people don't actually just reduce it, even if that is what they say they're doing. You know what I mean? But like this sort of stimulus response idea is used again for quote unquote interventions. So now these guys are heavily influenced by like the risk assessment and risk analysis guys. Like they use the same types of frameworks. So when you go in, you're going to start working with the kid. You're going to identify, well, here's the behaviors that are dangerous to themselves. Here are some behaviors that are dangerous to other people. And why are they happening? And once you figure that out, then it's like, okay, let's create a condition where they don't have to do that. So if they're doing this because they want access to something, we'll just give it to him. And then slowly over time, start to teach you could just ask, like, I'll give it to you. And you start that by delaying, Someone says they want it, so you kind of delay a little longer than you usually would, but then you give it to them. And then you kind of work on that kind of stuff. No, please.
So I have a question about behavioural health with relation to the education system then. So, I did a little bit of research on this before, and actually about 6 months ago, I think we were chatting about this on your Discord server, and you recommended this book to me, Verbal Behaviour, which
nice.
I had a quick read of. But so when we talk about behavioural issues in school, these 10% of kids or so, are behavioural issues a manifestation of the fact they're in an environment, in a system where their fundamental way of learning doesn't work, or do they have behavioural issues originally which prevents them from working in that system?
I mean, it's both. The idea that the behavioralists kind of take is that anyone can kind of adapt to any situation. So like where they kind of separate themselves from what they would call like Freudian analysis and all those kinds of guys or whatever, the way the behaviorists talk shit about them is just so naive. And it like, they talk about hypothetical structures. Like these guys thought metabolism wasn't proven and they called it a hypothetical structure. They're like, we shouldn't even talk about it. So, they have this sort of logical, positivistic fucking... It's so...
too precise. It's like trying to... Yeah,
like you're sticking your head up your ass. Yeah, like, all right, like some of us can't play your language game, bro. But, but anyway, what they do critique, though, is if you're going to say that someone has any kind of condition, they're sort of like, well, what does that mean exactly? So to your point, Seb, we have someone in the workplace who, whenever they're, getting feedback from the boss or whatever, they cry, they start to call in sick. You'll see within that month, they're going to call in sick like 5 different times. You kind of sense that they're stressed. They walk in, they're looking more fucked up, and it's like, it's not even personal. Like, I'm not even trying to fire you, but you could literally like identify how the environment is kind of feeding into that. So the behavioral view isn't about figuring out, well, maybe we should have people come into work at 10 a.m. because that probably would help this person straight up, or make them only come in 3 days a week. Like that could also help this person or whatever. There's this idea that we can acclimate to any environment. So the behaviorists are tabula rasa type motherfuckers, blank slate. And it's so trippy because they're like this close to being actual Nazis. And in fact, the philosophical roots are like there's certain experiments and shit. Like this is all fucking physiological, psychological craziness, and it comes from the same shit. However, in my experience, when we were working with this in schools, it's like it's a way watered down version of that. But I saw that idea of, instead of saying this kid doesn't listen, it's like, well, what are some conditions that I could provide so that at the very least he won't slide out of his chair? Or when I ask him what's the answer, he'll tell me. And maybe it's not giving him a test with 20 questions. It's adapting to one question. And if I get that, then I'm going to back off. And then over time, just trying to increase the load, if you will. So that's kind of like at the basis of everything that they're saying. But to your point, Seb, it's like within when we're at work or whatever, like I can't necessarily, I mean, up to a certain point, like ethics is where we would draw the line, but like I can't think of like, I can't necessarily look at what is the root cause. The only thing I can do is just adapt the environment as it is and provide an environment that will allow a person to adapt to what it is we're asking of them, like getting them to a certain performance level or whatever. So they have all this jargon, and like when you take a step back and appreciate it, it's great, you know, but it's when people start using it to obfuscate stuff, then it's like, see, you shouldn't even be using these words then. Like you lose the right to use these words now because you're not specifying. You're just confusing all of us.
That feels true for across the board, though. When people
100%.
start focusing super hard on terminology and word choices versus, this is why I fucking hate politics, by the way, because I feel like a lot of it comes down to that too. But yeah, that's when you know things are getting bad. You know what I mean? Or at least like the argument's not getting any more solid.
Exactly.
Yeah, man.
Yeah, this is great.
Let me ask you a question. Okay, wait. Can I veer? Because we got about 7 minutes before we open this up for Q&A. And there's one question I got to get in, which is you've been doing a lot of variations of the Tears in the Rain speech from Blade Runner lately.
Thank you. Yeah.
With some great stuff in there. What's going on with Blade Runner, dude? That's my favorite movie of all time.
You know what? I heard about that because you and damn, who was it? I think it was you and Ernest were talking about it. I think you, Ernest, and yeah, I can't recall who it was. We were on one, but yeah, you guys were talking about it, and then during the conversation, it was like, you haven't seen it? All right, you need to shut the fuck up and go watch that right now. So then I did, and I came back to the chat like, yeah, you guys, that was fucking amazing. I haven't even seen like I don't know yet. But I thought it was a good
movie because it's really deep, with a lot of existential philosophy thrown in, but like along the peripheral, you have to be picking it up. Cool.
I'm with that. Man, I'm with that. Happy. Yeah, so that's been the vibe. We get less sunlight now. You start thinking about the end of the year and then the end of your fucking life because it's coming for all of us. And then it's just like, wow. And I hear my children's laughter in the back off of after 8 hours of fucking nighttime. You know what I mean? And I was like, yo, I gotta send this shit off, get it off my chest, and then go do push-ups or some shit before I start crying.
So I'm gonna get my question in as well, actually, before we open it up. One of the benefits of being the host, I guess. But I wanted to talk about, if charter schools didn't exist, if we still had to work in this Procrustean bed of the American education system, what would be the biggest issue or the single policy change you would like to make that you think could have the biggest realistic policy change? Obviously, not like millions of dollars in every school.
Sure.
Yeah. What could have the biggest impact? Do you think with maybe the smallest amount spent?
Man, you know what? There's a. Sorry, I have to burp real quick. I'm so sorry, guys.
Okay.
Give it to us, man.
Let it out.
My bad. I mean, it was good though. Hopefully, we can throw an audio over that because that was phenomenal.
It's going to be the new alert tone for when a member leaves or joins the room on Fat Tony's. There.
I'll feed you, bro. I know. I heard someone leave right now. Fuck them. I'm kidding. Okay. But a change. I mean, I'm stealing this from a guy. Shout out to Joe Norman because I'm in his Applied Complexity 101 class, which is like,
oh nice.
dude, it like I'm ruined, bro. I don't. It's gonna take me like 2 summers of just sunning my balls to recover every hope that I've had. But it's an excellent class. It's beautiful. But there's a guy in there who works in like personal finance or something like that. And so he mentioned that people talk about a personalized plan, but what it actually is, it's a compliance plan. Like you're only in compliance. It's actually not personalized. So I feel that everyone does have a chance to learn algebra. At the core, that's what the fuck I'm arguing for. Once we start coming up with things like special education, even the law of special education is crazy. Like this is a critique of progressive law where they realize, hey, Congress did an investigation. There's a problem. They're just taking these kids and they're sticking them in another room, and like that's not cool. Like we should still be engaging and giving them education or whatever. So then they created an incentive. They said, we're going to set aside these monies, and anyone who gets this diagnosis, we're going to support you. We're going to give you money in order to help. But that's not how the law then got used. And then suddenly there were a lot of people who were getting all kinds of diagnoses because that's where the incentives were. And then they start looking into that shit and they're like, well, how are you determining if this kid is, intelligent or not? And they're using IQ tests and like it just, you know what I mean? It was just a mess. And if you looked a little deeper into it, like it's just super messy. It's fucking problematic. So then they ended up like, hey, they're trying to set limitations. You can't say someone has an intellectual disability when you haven't even taught them how to answer the question. So if they haven't even gone, and this is where the standards end up popping up, and that's why we have them, because before people were being targeted by not achieving performance levels or whatever, but they also weren't being taught. So it's like you can't hold that against this person. You haven't even taught them or whatever. So for me, it's sort of like we need to get back to that. What is it that we're trying to teach people? Because before I don't know when my mind changed. Honestly, it's a blur, and I probably went back and forth a couple times. But like, I think public education, as crazy as it is, like I don't know. I just have a feeling about it. You know what I mean? And I understand where people are coming from when they're like, we need to get rid of it. Like, all right, cool. Like if we do that, fine. I'm not tripping on that either. But I wouldn't vote for that. And what I would do is like personalize education. Seriously, why not just let a person come once a week if that's what works for them? And we kind of saw that with the lockdown. There were reports of kids who were not performing well like most of the people ended up getting fucked over by having to do homeschool or whatever. But there were some kids who performed like shit, and then at home they were able to get it done. I interviewed one of my friends. Like he was telling me this was happening at his school, and it was because his mom was right there. Like that was why. His mom was right there. And if he wasn't doing his work, she would just look at him. So I think for those kids, why not? So then people start bringing up socialization and all this stupid shit. And I'm like, I bet you if you talk to that person, you wouldn't find that he's not socialized. He just made a fucking hilarious ass joke about his mom being willing to whoop his ass on camera because he's not doing his work. And she's not fucking around. And she's willing to go to jail for that. You know what I mean? And it's just like, hey, man, it is what it is. So they need to vary things a little bit more. If you don't want other people getting involved and you don't want the libertarians to win, like then you need to give them a path inside and stop doing the regulatory capture or spreading propaganda, calling anything you don't agree with racist. And I don't mean this like our faux right-wing friends who are just a bunch of bitches. I don't mean it the way they mean it. I think there's propaganda that people really do throw out there, and it's just like, that's not helpful, bruh. Like, actually, that's fucking over the people. Again, I always come back to that. It ends up hurting the people that you're claiming to want to help by saying that kind of stuff. Anyway.
The personalization rings true. I know I've read studies over the years about, the sleeping patterns of teenagers, and just giving them an extra hour would like have huge outcomes. And
it's insanity.
We all have slightly different lives and styles of learning. Jack, I think it's time. Should we open this up? So we've got so many questions here, and I'm gonna unmute most people, but I'm just gonna start with Saad, who I don't think is here. No, he's not. So he says, and I think we can take this from a learning education point of view. But to what extent do you believe in free will with regards to learning versus coasting or kind of autopilot learning?
Damn. I'm like, yeah, free will is such a problem. I'm so mad at guys like Sam Harris because they're just so stupid, and it's unfortunate that they're able to just espouse ill-formed ideas. Like, he needs to read the behaviorists because they're saying the things that he was trying to say, and there are even a few of them that disagree with each other. Like, some guys actually do believe in mind, and they'll say mental connection, but they mean physiological. They're talking about neurons, so like they're basically being neuroscientists. And the critique from the other behavioral guys was sort of like, there's no proof that neurons exist. LOL. That's a hypothetical structure. Therefore, you're just talking out your ass. And it's like, well, in the grand scheme of things, you stupid motherfucker, who is right? And it was the guy who decided, like, who studied the cats and cut the frogs and all that kind of stuff. So anyway, when it comes to something like free will, I think what people mean in terms of studying, let's say, is if I had free will, I would be able to like study for an hour straight or whatever. And I think that's so fucking childish and bratty. If I had free will, I would be able to jump 20 feet. That's nonsense. But once you recognize in yourself, I can only study for 5 minutes, can you increase that time? And so to me, the free will part is the fact that you can change your environment in a way that it'll also direct your behavior in a certain way. Like, if you can't control yourself because you keep eating sugar too much, well, then stop buying fucking chocolate and leaving it in the house. You can't trust yourself. Even if you've been good for 3 months or maybe a day or whatever, that you're just going to go back and grab it. So, like, don't do that. Don't even put yourself in the position. And actually, Thorndike, from a behavioral point of view, to him, free will is maintaining the thoughts, and he meant this literally, like maintaining the mental configuration that will, maintaining a mental environment that will trigger the behavior that you want to conduct, basically. So, like, there are some guys who's like, there's no such thing as free will because your body is managed by the environment. And he's like, nah, you have an internal environment as well. And if you just think about what you want, you can kind of work yourself towards that. So these guys even disagree with themselves from their own view. You know what I mean? For me, I don't even...
Too. I was also thinking of this even from like the sort of like physics / quantum physics perspective of just like the Big Bang on, like, if you have a big enough computer, could you calculate everything that would happen thereafter? And
shout out to La Plaza,
like Twitter famous scientist Sabine
yes, she's always subbing me, bro.
Oh nice, yeah, she's an anti-free will person from this perspective, where she's just like, if you really think about it, it was, but there's a lot of quantum physics that has to do with probability that totally muddies the water. And then like Joe Norman gets into complexity. The Joe Normans of the world would say that the complexity of all these interactions is so high that it's effectively unknowable.
Mm-hmm. I personally subscribe to that. Like, if I were going to take Sabine's stupid ass material, keep that shit to physics. Don't start talking about the mind. Not unless she can start telling me what are the protein chains and all that other bullshit that's involved, Otherwise, she's talking out of her ass just as much as anyone else is talking out of their ass. Just as much as Eric Weinstein and his brother are talking out of their ass. She's talking out of her ass when she's saying that there's just no such thing as free will. What does that even mean? Like, that's what I want to ask them. Because when they say that, it's like, okay, now what?
Yeah, that's the thing, is what do we do with this information?
Yeah, exactly. Like, that's not pragmatic, motherfucker. How is that helping me make a decision? It's helping me make a decision in knowing, hey, if I'm completely controlled by my environment, why don't I put the things that are there? Like, I shouldn't be on Instagram. I should be reading a book if my interest is learning whatever the fuck. You know what I mean? So, like, for them, it's sort of, because you're controlled by Instagram, therefore you don't have free will. I'm like, but what if I can come up with a scheme to make me not be? And yes, I'm managing the environment, but not calling that free will. It's like we're talking about two different... You're talking about the instance, and we're arguing over how long does it take for me to recondition my body to start being determined by something else.
It's true.
So, like... Fuck, yeah, so they pissed me off, and I'm actually very disappointed in the fact that Sabine said this shit, man. I'm unfollowing her on YouTube. Fuck that.
She did a whole video on it, yeah.
See, I'm telling, she's subbing me, bro. She might not know who I am or ever even heard of me. No, not at all. She doesn't know who I am. But I'm saying, how do you keep saying all these things that are going to trigger me? You know I'm going to talk about it on my fucking timeline. She's doing it on purpose, bro. Her and Sam Harris. And they need to apologize to me, to be honest. Anyway.
All right, man. Well, we'll wait for that one to happen.
I love it.
Thank you.
I love it.
Sabine.
Sam Harris
Doctor.
especially, dude. I don't know if he feels like he's a little bit above it all. Sabine, maybe. She seems pretty nice.
Bro, he's a child, bro. And he tries to act all logical. You know, and kind of
I mean,
fucking
that's kind of
like
my issue with the Weinsteins too. Speaking of Twitter people, but Quasi's got a question.
Yo,
Should we get another
I
question
love
in?
the Weinsteins.
Oh,
Yeah, I'm done. I fuck with that EA shit. Anyway, sorry.
No worries.
Quasi, I think you had like, I couldn't tell if it was one long question or two or three different questions kind of in one. But you're live.
Start with one question.
Yeah, feel free to ask anything you want.
Quasi, this is one of my teachers I was talking about, you guys. Brilliant.
For sure. So I'm going to stay silent, but they are different questions though.
Let's start with one. Go from there.
For sure.
No, all right. I will ask them for him. What's the difference between a personality disorder and a behavioural disorder? What's the difference between personality and behaviour, and which gender is more associated with this?
Which is gender more associated with? Fascinating. They're basically coming from two different like philosophical roots. So the behaviorists, as talking about guys like Thorndike, Watson, John Dewey. I can't remember anyone else off the top, but there's like a bunch of guys that just like talk like that. B.F. Skinner, fuck, bro. Ugh. I told my wife I wasn't gonna cuss. My bad, you guys. So a what they would call a behavioral disorder it's not a disorder. Behaviorally, it's perfectly ordered, and it's ordered by the environment that it's in. So their approach to it is like, again, kind of identifying what are the actions that are describing the things that we're talking about. So I can't think of any personality disorder off of the top, but I imagine you can start to name sorts of actions. Is this person, they're just lying for no reason? And then the lies there was an ant on my fucking beer and it crawled into my mouth. That was kind of fire. So cheers to them. Cheers
to that, dude.
Cheers, man.
I'm so
Wait, what exactly? How would you define a behavioral disorder?
I mean, so it's not necessarily a behavioral. It's not a disorder.
How do they describe it to give us a baseline for kind of like?
I'm sorry. Honestly, like I'm not too sure. Like, there's a lot of diagnoses, right? We could say like schizophrenia or something like ADD or these diagnoses, like when they're coming in, for example, for us for work, like they're informing where we need to like observe what's physiological and what isn't, And so this was kind of on the point of if like, what if you don't have anxiety, you just don't have fucking magnesium? Like scaring you is gonna kill you. There's no desensitization. Get the magnesium and it goes away, and then you're able to sort of walk into these environments that would previously trigger, and over time you can recondition yourself to understand that the way I was reacting before was based on whatever the fuck, or like, who knows? Because like that's part of what's crazy about the human experience is there is so much that is internal or essentialist, which is what the behaviorists reject, and then there's a lot of it that is actually managed by the environment. Like, it 100% is. Being an asshole on Twitter is acceptable up until you start telling motherfuckers to, like, stop, bro. Like, fuck, we're trying to chill. It's not 3 p.m. right now. These are low traffic hours. It's okay to be normal now, and people will respond to that kind of shit. So like, these behavioral disorders, as they describe them, from our perspective, if we're called into work with whatever it is, we're not concerned with a disorder as much as the specific behaviors that are a danger to themselves, that are a danger to other people. In education, it would be things that are preventing a person's own learning or preventing other people's learning, which does happen. Like, if a kid stands up and starts throwing their desk around, the teacher has to get everyone up and walk them outside. and now you have less instructional minutes whenever this kind of stuff is happening. So these are kind of like their earmarks or whatever. Like this is what they're measuring. You know what I mean? So yeah. So in terms of gender, I mean, I don't even know. I don't even know how to. I don't even know how to approach the question. You know what I mean? Like not that there's anything wrong with it. It's just, are we? If we're talking about something physiological, like what is the continuity in the physiological sense? And if we're talking about something sociological, something that society is creating or whatever, like, well, what are the categories within each category? You know what I mean? And not even trying to like start talking circles and be a jackass. I just think like approaching it from a purely behavioral standpoint, it's difficult for them to answer that. But what they can answer is once we have decided what the rules of our game are, now they're trying to figure out what's the most efficient way of teaching that. In our case, you know, we have an ethical code and all that kind of shit because people used to shock kids for not listening. And I was like, bro, you can't just shock him because he doesn't do math. You can't fucking lock him in a room because he doesn't want to do English. Like that's not okay. So like now we have these ethic codes that are kind of like, you know, don't fucking do that kind of shit. Here are the things that you should kind of do. So we really do approach it from purely like a behavioral standpoint. Now, to address the critique of that, let's just say there's something underneath physiological that makes it into every new environment that someone's walking into. They're taking a little longer to figure out how to act in there. And what they're not doing is generalizing all those new skills we taught them, or if we even did, you know, they're just, there's always some new place and we're going to keep getting new fucked up things in these new places, or we're going to keep getting fucked up things in all the old places. There's something that we just can't recondition, as they would put it, or whatever. So yeah, I apologize. I know I didn't answer the question, but it's because almost like, you know, they don't answer the question and we need like another 5 hours to kind of like work through all of it.
I kind of love that. Like in conclusion, I didn't answer the question because they didn't answer the question.
My bad.
Carlo, you want to take a question from Italy?
I blame them. Oh, of course. Buongiorno.
Okay.
Giancarlo.
Buonasera.
You're live, Giancarlo.
Buonasera.
I think you had a couple of questions as well.
Yeah, maybe just start with one or two and take
hi everyone. Hi.
Hey, buddy.
So good to see you.
Likewise.
Yeah. My question for Matios is basically I believe that living or life is basically a trade-off between a sort of strategic orientation to control approach, so to speak, versus an environmental determinism. And I think that's the basic issue that could lead to some extent to a form of depression or frustration versus a form of accomplishment. So this trade-off, these two conflicting forces, so to speak, how do you believe that it could lead to a form of mental disorder such as major depression or anxiety? And to some extent, do you think that it is possible to speed up those symptoms versus to a form of alleviation to that symptoms? And the second question is related to the Asperger's syndrome.
Just start with the first one. Maybe we should just start with the first one first.
Kind of sure.
Okay. Oh man, control.
He wrote it down in the questions channel too. If you need a refresh. Do you believe that living is basically a trade-off between a strategic control approach versus environmental determinism?
Versus environmental. Oh man, that's deep. I think fuck. All right. In short, I don't know what I think yet, right? Because like for me, I've come in contact with so much shit, and then it's sort of coming to a point where it's like yeah, man, all these guys are actually making super reasonable points. And the part that starts pulling us, or the part that starts fucking up the conversation, is when, ironically, it's these empirical, philosophical, logical, positivistic, reductionist, deductive motherfuckers that become dogmatists. So then they'll be, we'll say, oh, this is a behavior. Like, that's not a behavior. And it's like, all right, well, whatever it is, now we have to kind of go back and start defining our terms, and the shit gets all like sticky or whatever. Mm-hmm. So in terms of like strategy versus environmental determinism, it's like there's a reality that we do operate off of the environment. But there's a level of sort of the spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak. However, the flesh can be reconditioned up to a certain point. Mm-hmm. So a lot of people that we know are doing 1 meal a day, or a lot of people that we know are lifting every other day. They're doing 3 to 4 sessions a week and all that kind of shit. And it's sort of like, your muscles are, the growth of your muscles is determined by the environment. It's determined by my own environment, my internal structure, structures that I have inherited. And so there are certain sequences of actions that I can take that I will respond to in different ways than other people will. And we have to kind of be like, we have to understand that not all of us will be able to squat 400 in X amount of time. Some people are just able to, because it just is what it is. But if you take enough time, you can work yourself towards your own limit or whatever. So I think there's an aspect of like, once you think it's just the environment, I think you can get lost. And I think this is where all the Nietzscheans and all those other idiots all kind of end up ruining the whole conversation, because this will to power and all this sort of shit where it's all external or whatever. And then you have the other guys across a bunch of different traditions, across a bunch of different millennia, that are like, bruh, just take your eyes off the external. Stop looking at the stuff. It's fucking you up, and you don't have what it takes to be able to resist it or whatever, so just get rid of it completely. So I think there is a level of how society is structured, let's say, like at your organization. And actually, Thorndike, who's fucking brilliant, you know what? It might actually be Watson. My bad. Watson, too. They're both brilliant, but Watson's a little asshole. For Watson, yeah, he's just a fucking... Yeah, dude, he be talking shit. I get triggered. Yo, yeah, he goes in on religion. I'm just like, fuck you, bro. You stole everything from Ramon Lowell. Like, you just sound like a Catholic monk, and you want to sit here and fucking erase history because you're a little... Anyway, sorry. So Watson, one of his things was like, their term for it is like reinforcement, but it's sort of effort matters. So instead of coming in and saying, hey, I need every individual employee to perform at this level, you need to tell yourself this is where they're performing. And then if your goal is to get them to a certain performance level, well, what are the things that you need to do? And Watson points out straight up, he's like, money might not be it. Like, money only works up to a certain point, but then his wife might get sick, or, his kid, something happened to his kid. So, like, money is not the motivator for this guy to decide, I'm going to keep improving. Like, his performance might just plateau. Heaven forbid, drop in productivity or whatever. And these guys are really influenced by fucking continuous growth and all that bullshit. And we know exactly where that goes. Like, the natural order actually is plateauing. Anytime you're applying a stressor, you have to recover. And that's something I stole from Kellen. Shout out to Kellen the man. I got a job off of saying that in an interview, man. And when I read him say it, like, it was just real. I was like, yeah, bro. And you find, like, in a lot of jobs where managers are just on your ass, there's nothing you could ever do to satisfy them or whatever, and they're completely full of shit, though. They don't even know what they want, or, they don't have their shit in order, so they try to blame you.
Yeah, where it's like, a guy in a warehouse who, packs boxes for Amazon or whatever. If he does 100 a day, you might be able to get him to 120, but you'll never be able to get him to like 1,000. Yeah,
exactly.
What I mean?
Exactly.
There's a limit to how much productivity can be eked out of a person.
Exactly. And, coming back to Taleb with skin in the game, like, if you're not there to understand the limitations of how this is wearing on your knee or how it's wearing on your hip, you just can't. These people are kind of making these decisions in abstract or whatever. So I definitely do believe that the environments that they are creating are making people depressed in any definition. whether we're talking behavioristic or even, you know, the I don't know, cognitively, or, you know, I don't know. Like, I don't know how people diagnose, because for me, really, and I mean, in a practical sense, like, the name of the diagnosis is not as important as understanding each behavior, but also understanding, you know, when you're dealing with something coming from a specific area of the, you know, I don't know, like, because we're not phrenologists either. So there's order, and then there's a level of, for myself, there's a level, like, I have to take a step back, because I don't know at the end of the day. What if everything I've seen, and we know this, the turkey problem, up to this point is pointing to this one thing, and then we take it to the next level and we find out, oh, fuck, there's damage in the cerebellum. It's not behavioral. The kid is rocking back and forth, and you're over here trying to make him fucking stop, and it's like, but that's physiological. Oh, well, we didn't know because we didn't have the sensors to be able to tell at the time. And for me, it's like, motherfucker, that's not an excuse. That's not okay. You can't just say, oh, I didn't know. You should have exercised a little bit more precaution. If only there were principles related to this that people could employ, or things that they could read. You know what I mean? It's a shame, bro. We're just walking out here blind, man. There's no one warning us.
Oh, man.
I mean, as always, the time is just flying by here. I can't believe we've only got 10 minutes left. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to park Jean-Carl's second question, and I'm going to get Shay on the line, because I think he has what looks like a really good question about special education. So, Shay, buddy, if you're there, you're live. Feel free to ask away.
Sebastian, I am here, but I'm driving. If you would please ask the question for me.
Yeah, no problem at all. So Shay wanted to ask, regarding special education, where is the point where education becomes better life skills teacher than life itself? He asks because he has two friends with autistic children. One sends her son to regular school, and of course he's picked on and sometimes left behind, while the other has transformed her life and home, her actual home, to ensure maximum intervention. For example, special classes, sensory gyms. Both are well intentioned, but it's too early to see the results yet.
Yeah, no, I mean, the things that he's describing, like these sensory rooms, oh, dude, because there's a lot of overlap with like occupational therapy and physical therapy and man, but like the theories they're super beautiful. So this is what I was saying like before about reductionists, or just, we all know that applying these calculus type thinking to things that are not smooth. And that's where the problem is, because now the variation is there, and some variation is so deviated that, you know, there are certain things you can't come back from and all that kind of stuff. So anyway, these sensory rooms, the gym, the sensory room, and like the extra classes that Shay is describing, like these are increasing opportunities for action. Oh, sorry guys, my McAfee popped up. RIP to the king. This is increasing opportunities for actions, like literal, you know, moving, pinching, grabbing, and all this kind of stuff. And it's just so crazy, because this is what trips me out about the behaviorists, man. Like their head is up their ass for sure. The thinkers, I'm saying, not to my bosses or anyone in the field. You know, anyway, if I get fired, teach me JavaScript.
No, but it sounds like you kind of dig on like some stuff regarding behavioralism, because you were talking about using it in your own work to, like, you know, answer one question instead of throwing all of them at once. You get them used to it, get them feeling comfortable. But then it also sounds like maybe the more dogmatic set is the group that you're not like huge fans of.
100%. Like that's always where the problem is. You know, when I got involved, these people were talking about, you know, we're empirical, we're pragmatic. You know, we use scientific attitudes and all this stuff, and that's what got me involved into looking, well, what is the philosophy of science? And then you start hearing guys say different things, and it's just like, oh man, how do we even begin? Between Berkeley, Locke, and Hume, it's like, well, what is an empiricist? Because they all disagree. And then in the actual behaviors with Thorndike, Watson, Skinner, and, you know, other German guys from way back in the day, it's like, where do we even begin this? So yeah, to me, it's their method, their way of looking at the world. So they end up thinking of in terms of opportunities. Like the way you condition yourself is by doing the thing a bunch of times. when you end up with a sensory room or these kinds of things that parents are talking about, it gives you an opportunity to like not only for the kid to do a bunch of stuff and move around, you know, get coordination and all that kind of stuff, but like ask you to push them on a slide or put them at the top or do an action, and you can teach them this. And Watson, the guy that I'm saying is a fucking jackass, talks about teaching his kid at like 150 days old how to talk. And the way that he did this was he had a bottle or whatever, and he would say "da" to the baby, and then the baby would whine or the baby would cry, and if it did this, he'd give the baby the bottle. And then over time, then the baby would see him, he'd have the bottle, the baby would say "da." So then he said "da da," and then he'd give the baby the bottle. So anytime the baby would say "da," he would be like "da da" and give the bottle. And then eventually the baby started saying "da da." So now to these behaviorists, this is called shaping or whatever. I don't think Watson called it that. But you have these opportunities to do in these sensory rooms or all these extra classes. You're able to like teach an action or teach the names of things. I think that's where the important part is. Earlier, the way Seb said, we have education is just this Procrustean bed. You have kids who don't fit into the educational model or whatever, and then they end up left behind, or they used to be stored somewhere. Like literally, this is what they were doing, which is why the laws all came out the way they did. Specifically in terms of education, there comes a point, we were talking about physiological limits, let's say, things that kids can and can't do, whatever. There comes a point where they're like, look, it's not servicing this person to continue trying to give them these academic skills. So then they'll shift over to a functional skills classroom. And this was the type of classroom I walked into for the first job that I ever,
Oh, I think I've lost it my side.
Oh, can you hear me?
We can hear you.
You're. Oh yeah, we got you.
You're back.
You had a sweet pause frame.
Yeah.
Oh, perfect. My bad. Got him. What was I saying with that? Yeah, I ended up in this functional skills classroom, and this is a shift away from academics. You're working more on fine motor, gross motor, but then you're also doing things in the community where kids are able to learn how to read bus schedules and train schedules and all that kind of stuff. So like when executed seriously, in earnest, when you're saying, hey, here's a person who needs to learn these adult skills, they need to learn how to like pay their rent, they can get a job, this is available for them, they can work at a bunch of different places. It doesn't have to be at Guitar Center or Goodwill or even at Google, you know, like they can work anyone can work anywhere. This is America. We can figure this shit out seriously, not just doing this performative bullshit for people to get pats on the back or likes on Instagram or none of that stuff. You know what I mean? We can be serious about this. And once you start doing this kind of stuff, I feel like there is sensibility in that. And that's kind of been our critique of the educational system. Like when people are like, I've never had to use SOHCAHTOA ever in my life. I'm like, fuck you. That's not why high school was worthless. However, there are these certain social, you know, you got to listen to your teacher or else they'll kick you out. Like all that crap, we don't live in that society anymore, you know? Like you have to come to terms with the fact you walk into a class, you want to teach a subject, and it might be that a kid watched a whole series on YouTube about that shit. And people don't want to accept that. They want to consider themselves like experts in a domain or whatever. And it's just not realistic, you know what I mean? So for your friend Shay, I think it's great that a kid should go into public education. I think that public education has a responsibility to provide assist. Like this is a social service. Tax dollars are going towards this shit. Education has a philosophy, and this was part of what the pragmatists were trying to do because they wanted a society that was going to be informed by science. But seriously, not being a bunch of little, you know, not being foolish with our decision making. This is where Popper comes in because he kind of extends that. And that was Charles Saunders Peirce talks a lot about that shit. One of the pragmatists. And I'm sorry, you know, but fucking whatever. I just want to throw the names out there so motherfuckers can read it. And I'm not trying to name drop. I know people are sensitive about that shit. Anyway, sorry.
I got a question because we're basically out of time. But I know you read like a really ridiculous amount of philosophy. And who would be, if you could throw out one, either philosopher or philosophy book or, you know, one thing to the audience to check out. And I'm writing this down too, because I I almost never read philosophy, but I want to. It's just never been something that's been part of my regular. So if you have one,
Karl Popper, Myth of the Framework.
okay,
This motherfucker,
a college classic, man.
Absolutely. He's going in on big science. He's like, big science is full of shit. We're about to lose the soul of this institution that we can use to make better decisions. And this is why I was saying he's an extension of Charles Saunders Peirce or CSP or whatever, because Charles Saunders Peirce believed if we do science in earnest, serious inquiry, we're all going to converge upon the truth. Now, you're a dumb motherfucker if you think that that's going to happen, because money is behind this shit. So, like, there are incentives for people to just chop people off at the legs. But that's what Popper was about. He was like, don't let them do this. All they're doing is making people a bunch of technicians. These motherfuckers get PhDs, but they don't know what they're doing. They don't know why we measure the way we do. They can't distinguish between something discontinuous and something that's continuous. They're just using a method that they learned, and we're equipping them with 37 methods, and then we're turning them on the world, and we're saying, these are the methods that you use to parse reality to make your decisions. And we can see where that got us. So it's like Taleb is 100% within that tradition. Because Popper was like, fuck verificationism. I don't care if you can verify my arguments, which we saw in social sciences, and we saw how that went. So thanks a lot to those guys. But it was like,
the replication crisis.
Man, the replication crisis. I mean, there's a crisis in neuroscience as well, where these guys were doing like emotion science. And shout out to Dr. Lisa Feldman Barrett, because she came in flipping tables on these guys. Even the way that they were asking questions, they were sort of feeding people the answers. They'll show you a face and they'll be like, "Is this sad, happy, angry, or whatever?" So like, you're automatically binding. Now I don't know what that face is, but if I have to decide between happy, pensive, and angry, you've given me kind of a relation without even intending. So she's like, these guys are dumb. They're over here thinking that we have emotions on certain sections of the brain. It was modern phrenology. And she actually blamed Plato, which I resented. But I understood what she meant, and she was right, because there was that element of the way they were categorizing emotions that comes from him. But in his whole thing about, what a thing is constantly coming into being. And that was sort of her take on what emotion is as well. So anyway, Karl Popper, Myth of the Framework, because he talks about falsificationism or the falsification principle or the demarcation principle, whatever the fuck they want to call it. But he reins it in that later paper. So that, because, people kind of take that to the extreme. And he's like, no, I'm not trying to be a jackass. I'm saying, here's the limit of what we can say. There are other things, and they are correct. Now, once those people figure out how to word it in a way that we can then start testing, well, sure, but otherwise it's not our same thing. But it wasn't chopping them down, not like the dumbass analytic philosophers. Don't read the analytic philosophers. That's my rep. It's not about Popper. It's about who not to read. These dumbass, fuck the Vienna Circle, bro. Anyway, my bad.
I think, Popper's one of my heroes. Open Society and Its Enemies. Definitely my top 5 books of all time, and I'm really sorry we're out of time for the Q&A. We do ask our guests, if you're up for it, Matios, jump in the Fat Tony's Lounge and just have a bit of a happy hour where everyone can just chat, completely free form.
Yeah.
Matios, a chance to ask you questions they haven't had time to now.
You want to plug anything? You got anything to plug for the audience? The amazing audience.
Strength Co got a Black Friday sale right now. So if you go in there and get a month worth of training, you get an additional, there's a class that's worth like $150. Make sure you guys check that shit out. Okay. It'll help your back and your hamstrings.
We're going to have to send this clip to Grant, dude. He'll love it.
Yo, you already know. Grant already knows. You feel me? Like, it's no accidents. The world is real. Shout out to reality, you guys.
Cheers,
whatever that is.
Reality.
Cheers.
All right, it's been real fun, Matios. Really, really fun. Probably one of the funnest Q&As we've done. And thank you guys for coming over. And it's just been an absolute pleasure to have you here.
No, likewise. Thank you guys very much.
Absolutely, man. Absolutely. I'm so glad I could jump in. All right, I'll be able to hang out in the lounge for maybe like 15, 20 before I should get.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll hop in. Just don't record the other one, you guys.
That's where it gets. It's
not for no reason.
All right.
Yeah. JK, this is my
We don't need to
professional
record
account.
that.
I'm always professional.
Why not? I just don't think we need to record it. I don't know.
No, I feel that. Hey, we should record it. Just kidding. Anyway, whatever. Hey, thank you guys so much.
All right, guys. See you soon. Take care, and thanks for attending again.
All right. See you guys over there.
Bye-bye.
Peace.